You're watching The Experience, Comic Culture and Sales. Streaming live daily to Facebook, YouTube, Twitch, and Twitter.
2, 1.
So we get a text yesterday from Bronze Age Nerd going, hey, I have an opportunity, and I don't know what it's going to mean for the show. And he told us what the opportunity was, and we never actually addressed what it would mean for the show because Jay and I set about making endless amounts of probably inappropriate jokes, but also, like, did he expect something different? I don't know. But needless to say, Bronze will be joining us. He is stuck in traffic. He'll be here momentarily. And I will make him tell you about the opportunity he had and about the inappropriate jokes that Jay and I made. So that's a part of the show tonight. But the other thing is, this is viewer mailbag part 2. We have more questions from y'all that we didn't get to last week. Last week we decided, we're going to talk about, we're going to have all these topics and we're going to have certain things we talk about. And these are these are them. And we got through 1 of 5. So today, the other 4. But first, inappropriate jokes with Bronze Age Nerd. We'll be right back. This is Devil's Advocates. Did any of the jokes involve fish? No, Preston, but they did involve alternative lifestyles and whether or not Jason Momoa would be opening. Well, I suppose whether or not this person would be open to having one with me. Do you want to tell people who you just met?
I would love to tell people who I just met. If I had just met them, I would love to do that. Unfortunately, what I did is drove far away with reservations to go do something that apparently a lot of other people really wanted to do. So I can tell you the most exciting thing that's happened to me today is I was within 4 feet of Jason Momoa, but did not meet him.
Yeah, but in that 4 feet, did you get any of him on you?
Oh, for sure. Some like germs, pheromones, some musk. There's a photo of me with him in the background. I mean, it's very exciting.
That's like, it reminds me of the time that I had dinner with Stan Lee, which is to say we ate dinner in the same restaurant at the same time.
Right. I love that story.
Right.
I mean, I did get a little parting gift, which is his brand new vodka, which is the reason that he was at the event he was at. So that's pretty cool. But yeah, unfortunately, no dice on what I went there for, which was hopefully to set something up, but it never even happened.
I had that same opportunity once with Snooki. Yours is better.
I agree. even the experience that I just had, it was definitely good. But yeah,
I actually had to meet Snooki.
I still think mine was better.
No, that's what I'm saying. Yours was better because, yeah. For those that don't know, the Copper Age Babe is my wife. She's away on vacation right now. She was upset that she didn't get a chance to get within 4 feet of Jason Momoa. And the good news is I didn't run away with Jason Momoa. So I was gonna tell a different story. How do I put this, Preston? There wasn't drinking with Snooki. It was, you want this bottle of booze that isn't even the booze she's here to promote? Well, you have to wait in line to meet Snooki and buy a bottle of the booze she's here to promote. And I'm like, but I want Jack Daniels. And they're like, but tough, closed for other reasons.
So
fine.
Is it safe to say that you did it all for the Snooki? The Snooki?
No, I did it all for the Jack Daniels. I met Snooki so I could buy a $40 bottle of Jack.
I got you. What is it, like a special batch or something?
What?
Was it a special
No,
bottle?
the liquor store was closed except for this engagement where Snooki was selling some awful kind of vodka.
Gotcha. Well, I was hoping you at least walked away with some kind of, limited reserve kind of thing.
Right. No, I got Snooki's vodka, and then I says to the guy from the liquor store, okay, I bought the garbage vodka. Can I buy the low-end bottle of Jack now that I came here for? The guy's like, yeah, great. Okay. Whatever. Anyway.
Yeah.
I was going to tell a story during the cold open before I started setting up that we, were unsympathetic to your plight about being worried about traffic. You were worried about making it back on time, and Jay and I were nothing if not unsympathetic.
Well, as well you should be.
Right. Now, so today I went to the post office, and I have a P.O. box, but I don't have a great big P.O. box. I have a pretty small P.O. box because I have a porch pirate problem in my neighborhood.
Mm.
And I go to the P.O. box and I open the door and there's the little key for the parcel boxes that they have there for your bigger shiz.
Yeah.
So I go and I open the parcel box and it's empty. I got to go there tomorrow and sort this out. But the end of the story is we don't do that here. We get to your mail here. And so we're going to do viewer mailbag part 2 today.
I love it.
Yes. See, I was supposed to be the cold open, but I just decided to go a different direction with it.
It was great. I learned a lot about as much as you could possibly learn with an actor's strike underway about upcoming Jason Momoa projects, as if I actually interviewed him. So it's about the same result.
Yeah. So should we get into our topics?
Absolutely.
So last week we talked about the difference between a 9.8, 9.9, and 10. And we thought that'd be 20 minutes, and it took us a whole hour. So I want to start with some of these other topics, like print runs is the bullet point. I don't know what the exact question was, but I think someone probably wants to know about comic book print runs.
Well, and there's a lot to it too. I mean, even though that's I think it was just something that was brought up in a chat, like you guys could talk about print runs, and it's a good topic because there's actually a little like the question last week. There's a lot to it. Again, I feel like it might be a shorter than one whole episode conversation, but you never know. I think part of the question is, I think there's really two ways you can go with it, and I'll see what you think, Kyle. The one way I think you can go with it is, do print run sizes matter? Or, can we talk about large versus small print runs? The other way you can go with it is, how do you even know what a print run is these days? Because there's a lot of ambiguity around actual distribution levels and sales numbers and all that, and limited exclusives, artificial rarity and with print runs as well.
So I could tell you the answer to one of those things definitively. And that's, how do you know what a print run even is these days? And the answer is you don't.
Yeah, exactly.
In fact, you never have.
Also true.
Companies writ large do not disclose print run numbers.
Well, actually, hold on. Wait a minute. I say true, but it used to be.
No, it didn't used to be.
No, in the Silver Age.
No, it didn't used to be. I'm going to get to that.
Okay.
What used to happen was at the end of the month or the end of the story arc or after a certain period of time post-release, those numbers became readily available. Today, it's more guarded than that. It might have even been the week after the book was released, the print run came out back in the Silver Age. But it was never, we're publishing Daredevil this week, and we printed 150,000. Like, that information was never put out that way. It was usually released after either the orders were finalized, after the book was released. It was a period of time depending on the publisher after.
Right. But eventually you could determine the sales
made public. Yes.
Yeah.
Well, and you can kind of determine print run now if you look at enough math.
Yeah.
But the thing I could tell you definitively is that publishers will never tell you the size of their print run. And if they do, they're likely lying.
Yeah.
So if they say, oh, we only printed 10,000, they might have printed 15,000 and only 10,000 are what they're going to call releasable.
Right.
Or only 10,000 are what's going to go into the market. The other 5 are creator comps, office comps, archivals, other things, right? So you have to be able to do this. You have to be able to do kind of the extrapolated math to kind of figure out what the numbers are. There are several caveats to that, though. When they are talking about a limited print run specifically, like they're marketing it that way, they will talk to you about print run. When you're dealing with super indies, so oftentimes create Kickstarter, creator-owned stuff,
Right.
the print run number will be much more accurate and real. And finally, when we're talking about records and huge numbers, Berserker, Spawn 300, these things where the print run and the order are so substantial, it benefits the company more to be on Front Street with their numbers than it does to obfuscate those numbers.
But even then, you look, historically, you run into an issue with returnable books as being part of that as well, where Berserker was returnable. So when you have that huge initial sales number, which is the number of copies that went out to retailers, you do have to wonder about, the actual final math and how all that works and whether or not that's actually accounted for.
Well, I mean, we're talking about print runs, not market size.
Right. Well, exactly.
So there's
But
a differentiation there too. Like,
of
if
course,
they sold 100,000 copies of Berserker, they probably printed 110,000 copies. Right?
Yeah.
But the market size is the number that went. So the initial market size is the number that went to retailers. Then the actual number back is a number that they will eventually disclose, likely. And that will tell you how many actually hit the market. So like we're talking about, if we talk about print run, we have to make sure we differentiate between the print run of a book and how many actually make the market.
Right. And that's an important distinction to bring up because people often conflate those two numbers.
Mm-hmm. Right. So, I mean, that's a part of this. The thing I think is important about print runs, and Preston, or somebody said earlier, I think print run size matters, but can you believe that the stated print run is accurate? Here's why I don't think print run size matters. And it's not the size that matters, it's the motion of the ocean. And what I mean by that is this. If the book sucks, it doesn't matter how few were printed or how many were printed. The book sucks.
Yep.
If the book is good, then print run can matter. Because if they only print 1,000 copies of the greatest comic ever made, that comic is going to be worth a lot of money. Like, it just is what it is. But how many indie creators do you know who print 1,500 copies of their book, and their book is good, but it's not going to set the world on fire?
Yeah.
Well, that low print run doesn't actually matter. That's knowing your market or knowing your sell-through ability or whatever. Whereas when you have some great books that are coming out, again, print run is everything. So,
yeah, it's one of those things where I think that, and something that I come up against a lot because I am both a collector and I'm to an extent a speculator, although that's not really the way I think of myself. It is the category I fit in. I do both of those things. And so print run somewhat will factor into both of those things a little bit. But really, when it comes to the reader side and being a comic book collector, it's just, can I find a copy? Can I get my hands on a copy? Because generally speaking, you're going to only care if it's a very small print run which might make it really hard to find something like, you know, say a Kickstarter where it's exclusive to everybody who backed it, and then no extra copies are printed until like maybe a trade later on if it's really successful, or some kind of a reprint maybe. And then in a lot of cases, not even that. Or from the opposite side, like, you know, your X-Men 1, that kind of stuff, where it's like the biggest selling comic of all time. And that's can be a fun event to be part of, or like the Death of Superman, or some of the other big events we've talked about before. It can be exciting to get in on that front. When it does come to like the investment speculation kind of side of things, which I do enjoy, it's not my number one thing with comic books, but I like it. It's fun. It's kind of an extra little part of the hobby. And it's something that a lot of people do care about these days. That's where I think it starts to matter more in people's eyes. But in my eyes, it's just insane to think about, oh, did you hear this copy only had a 10,000 print run? I mean, we're talking about comic books that used to be printed in hundreds of thousands and millions of numbers, and now we're at this, you know, much more market appropriate number. That's the thing, though, is it's still market appropriate for the most part. There's not many comic books that come out, and I mean like specific issues, where you're not going to find the comic book you want. It's going to be next to impossible to find the comic book you want. It does happen, but it's pretty rare. And what usually happens is I can't get my preferred cover or edition or version of that comic book, as opposed to I have no way to read that comic book and I'm just totally out. It happens occasionally, but it's pretty rare. And so that's why I definitely kind of fall in that. Like, I don't think it matters anywhere near as much as people make it out to be a big deal.
See, and there are things in there that you said that I vehemently disagree with.
Okay.
But the problem with vehemently disagreeing with it is that it doesn't really leave room to have a discussion on this. And the fact of the matter is that if you're speculating at all and you're considering print run, you're pissing money down the drain.
Oh, 100%.
You just are.
Yeah.
If you're speculating at all, you're pissing money down the drain. Period.
That part I don't agree with. But yeah, I mean,
as
far as print run goes,
you're going to lose.
Yeah.
Like, for every one book you speculate on and you hit, you buy 4 books that you speculate on and you lose.
Can happen, yeah.
That's generally the way it works.
Yeah.
So when we talk about that, and then we're going, well, they only printed 1,000 of this, or 1,500 of this, or, you know, 2,000, whatever. Now you're putting a arbitrary set of framework on your speculation. So you're not even speculating on whether or not the book will be popular or the book will have value. You're speculating on whether or not the fact that they printed so little of this book will somehow enhance the inherent value of a new book. And by the way, the inherent value of a new book is 0.
Yep.
Like, so 1,500 times 0 is 0. Just because they make 1,500, just because I make 1,500 turds doesn't make them valuable. Like, and that's the thing that when we talk about print run that really gets me frustrated and flabbergasted, right? Is that the only reason it ever comes up in honest conversations in the comic book world is people who are trying to justify an otherwise unwise expenditure.
Wait, so I have to know though, Kat, which, even if we don't get into it, which part do you disagree with what I said then? Because I agree with all that.
Some of the nuance, I guess, of what you say, what you just said, and what I hear from other people. So I may have conflated what you actually said with what I was expecting people, with what normal people say after it.
Yeah, and that's the big difference here. When you think about that part of the market, look, I'll be the first person to tell you that I think most of the collectible market, even not just comic books, generally looks to the wrong things for the wrong reasons, because they hear about it from sources and go, that's cool. That's the problem. Once you've heard about it from other sources and you're trying to follow along with that trend, if there is some magic there, you're already too late, because that's the magic that's making it so those initial few buyers are able to resell and make something off of it. So that's a whole different ball game and a different part of the discussion. But look, when it does, like you just said, when it comes to print run, where you hear about it the most these days is from that investment. What's the value of my old comic book? What's the value of my new comic book based on the print run? That generally becomes another part of the conversation. Or when you're talking about just how successful was a comic book, how's the health of that particular segment of the industry going? And that to me is where it has more value.
And here's the other problem with the print run number. And it's why market number or how many have recent sales numbers are so much more telling. If I get a sales number, if I get a print run number from a book from the 80s, that in no way reflects how many issues or how many copies of that book are out there or still exist.
Yep.
Right? So what's more important to me when I look at, is this comic book valuable, or how do I assign a value to this comic book, is how many copies have been sold on eBay in the last 6 months? How many copies have sold on Heritage? How many copies have sold on Comic Link? These kind of things, because those are indicators of this book is on the market and regularly selling, or this book is on the market and not regularly selling, or there's a reason that this book is selling all of a sudden and it didn't used to.
Yep.
And you can look at all of those things and say, okay, this is how I'm pricing my book. This is why I'm doing what I'm doing.
Yeah. And to add some flavor to that, people think about books that are commonly sold, or you'll see discussion of this gets tied in with this because it's an interesting way to look at it, is books that are being slabbed a lot right now. You'll see a lot of that kind of conversation. And it ties into the idea that, hey, maybe there's something going on with this book that's, causing it to move on the market more. But what people don't think about sometimes when it comes to the value of comic books, especially when we're talking about some older comic books, there's a lot of stuff out there that there's probably a lot of copies out there that will never change hands, or will only change hands as being like passed down to somebody or given away to somebody when that collector, maybe passes away, or when they're ready to give their collection away. Because there are books out there that people just don't want to give up. And so when you think about that, availability on the market is a huge factor when it comes to value on comics. There are comic books, Giant Size X-Men #1 is a really good example. Heated up a few years ago, people were getting excited about X-Men value in books and then wanted to move on them. Giant Size X-Men #1 is a very, very high print run book. It's from the late Bronze Age. There's a lot of them out there that survived and are in really good condition. Once people started seeing the value, all of a sudden the market was flooded with copies. And what did that do? It ultimately drove down the value a little bit. Also, the interest kind of fell off a little bit as well. But it's that sort of, that sort of cycle you have to pay attention to, is if you're looking for a book and you're kind of timing it out and you want to buy the book and you're worried about the print run in regards to how many are out there, start to consider, at what point will the most copies be on the market? Will this hit a saturation point where those first few buyers are going to jump on it? They're going to pay the premium, but then you kind of start to see prices roll back as the people that were willing to pay extra for it have already obtained their copy, and now they're not as interested in buying copies of that book, but they're still listed because everybody's listing them now.
I'll give you another example that I think is pretty telling, as it were. When Stan Lee passed away, I had met Stan half dozen times, gotten probably a dozen or more books signed by him, action figures, Funko Pops, all kinds of stuff, right? When Stan died, the instinct for me was to not put that stuff on the internet, right? Was to not put that stuff on eBay.
Yeah.
Because what was going to happen was every heartless, gutless, worthless piece of human trash was going to throw their Stan Lee stuff up for 8 million times what it was actually worth. Right? I'm not saying that Stan Lee's autograph isn't worth a bunch, But there was a guy who had a signed Stan Lee Funko Pop who put it on eBay for $4 million. That is not an appropriate reaction to the death of someone. So what I did was I waited and I watched everything spike up, and my friends are going, Kyle, you got to sell this stuff. Kyle, you got to sell this stuff. No, wait. And then I watched the prices roll back. They were still higher than they were before.
Yeah.
But the prices rolled back. And then I watched the scarcity go up because everything was getting bought up and everything was getting bought up. And now there's a valley, right? The price is still kind of high and there's not a lot of stuff. So you could set your price 10 or 15% higher than where the market was and sell them. And you're actually probably about where the market ceiling is then. And it's this idea with comics too, that the print run only matters when, I really want to say it matters, but the print run only matters when what the print run is affects the availability on the market.
100%.
If you only print 100 copies of something, the most that are ever going to be on the market is 100 copies. So now when you see that 90 of those copies have sold recently, that means there's only 10 other copies. So if somebody's selling one, then you've got to decide, is that value worth it or not? Because you know the print run. So let's get to some of these comments and move on to one of the other topics.
Hold on. Before we do, I think we're going to have one big cameo on the show real fast. This is going to be, you guys blink and you'll miss it, but there is going to be a quick celebrity cameo on the panel, and then we will get to your questions in chat. Folks,
Wait,
everybody,
your wife's coming on?
You might be surprised at this one, Kyle. I just want you to brace yourselves. Everybody kind of sit down for a second. If you're standing up, everybody say quick hello to Jason Momoa. That's right. There he is, Jason Momoa, the man himself, Aquaman, maybe Lobo. We don't know. Right there, about 4 feet away from yours truly. And anyway, that's as close as I got. So, all right. I had to.
Feel like you're close enough to grab his butt. I'm just saying.
I mean, I was close, but you know what? Which one is okay? Fair enough. Which one is Jason? So if you look on the far right, there's a gentleman in a hat and sunglasses with several lays on, and that is your the man, the myth, the legend, Jason Momoa. So that's you know what? It's close. When I saw the line wrapping clear around the giant grocery store, probably literally about a mile long. It's closer than I ever expected to get. I'll give you that much. So, anyways, there we go.
All right,
had to.
So some of these comments. I have a topic. Is all these YouTube guys who seem to have 9 Hulk 181 or 6 giant size X-Men healthy for the average collector? We'll add that into the list, round guy.
Yep. Yeah, there's a few things around that topic we could definitely talk about.
Ed says, I don't know if it fits this conversation or maybe a later time, but I've heard a lot of bad things about Kickstarters from comic book stores. For example, Brian Polito is the Kickstarter king, but stores don't know how many to order to sell because many people buy them on Kickstarter. Does that fit in the conversation? Well, that's part of another conversation we're going to have, Ed. One of our other topics. So maybe we should just jump to that one.
I think we could. I mean, I think that if there's any other comments you want to get to in chat, otherwise we could jump right into our second topic.
No. So the second topic we have is how can we support small comic book publishers? And how I think this ties into Ed's question. Kickstarter is not good for the local comic shop, by and large. It's not meant to be. If it was, it would be something else. Kickstarter is great for people who don't have the mechanism to go any other direction. And what I mean by that is this. If you're a small publisher, and the question was small publishers, so I'm going to talk about the smallest of publishers. If your idea of a small publisher is Boom or IDW, we need to have a conversation about realistics. Right? When we talk about small publishers, we're talking about the smallest. And so there's some things that I think you need to know about distribution that make this easier. First, for a long time, when Diamond was the only game in town, Diamond would not distribute your book unless you could sell 2,500 copies of every issue through previews. So that means if your initial order wasn't 2,500 copies, Diamond would not distribute your book. 2,500 is not a lot of copies. But it is when you're one guy writing, drawing, having them printed, and then shipping them out of your garage. Somebody like Henri, 2,500 copies is a lot of copies to sell at one shot of every issue. It's not a lot of copies to sell over the length of a book or over the life of a book, but it is a lot to sell in one shot.
Yeah.
And so Diamond wouldn't even deal with you. So what Kickstarter did was it gave you an opportunity as the smallest of publishers to go out and find your crowd, the people who want to buy your books, and sell them your books directly. Brian Pulido and Tom Hutchison of Brian Pulido of Coffin Comics and Tom Hutchison of Big Dog Inc. are really bad examples when it comes to this. Because those are companies that are successful enough and large enough that they probably could go a more traditional route and still be successful.
Yeah.
But when you talk to Brian, or which we've done in the past, when you talk to Tom Hutchison, which we do regularly, the thing you find out is that for them, going to Kickstarter is way more efficient because a lot of stores won't carry their product anyway. Right? So they could go to all the work to get into Diamond. And by the way, it's a lot of work. Like the distributors have very specific rules. And if you've ever been to like Comics Pro, the comic company, or the Comics Professional Trade Organization, right? They talk about this stuff. Like companies, Source Point Press, I'll never forget the first batch of books they signed for Dynamite. Dynamite charged them extra. They got less back from the sales of their books because the size of the box that the scan code was in, the barcode, was too small. Right? So Diamond charged them extra for every copy. Right. There is so much that goes into getting into distribution that we don't even know about.
Yeah.
Right? That for a company that is really small, or a company that is a startup, or a company that is trying to be niche like Coffin, it's easier just to sell direct to your consumer through your website and through Kickstarter. So the original question is, how do we support small comic book publishers? And the answer to that question for me is buy the books where they're at.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So if Coffin Comics is only on Kickstarter, go to Kickstarter. Buy the book.
Well, and in that specific example, they're not only on Kickstarter, by the way. You can order now certain covers and all that, sure.
Not every book.
Right.
Very specific books, and that's what I was getting at. If they're on Kickstarter, back them on Kickstarter. If they're in a local comic shop, buy them from a local comic shop.
Right.
If they're both, differentiate. Right? So one of the things, Sean and Jay and Jenna are big Kickstarter supporters. They buy a lot of stuff from Kickstarter. And one of them that they mentioned was Garrett Gunn's Good Boy, which is a great book, super fun. But I knew that was going to be out in stores as well. So the level that I backed the Kickstarter at to support the Kickstarter was different than what I would be able to buy in stores. Right?
Yeah.
So it allowed me to go both places and not have spent any more than I was going to spend anyway.
So one thing, can I jump in and make a couple points here? So the way that I think this is important to look at when you're talking about supporting small publishers, 100% what Kyle said. It's that you need to choose where and when you want to support the publisher, because the question wasn't how to support an LCS. However, the follow-up question in chat was Kickstarters, how does it affect things like an LCS? Is it bad for them? And here's the lens I want to it's kind of an analogy to bring up. Think about radio, terrestrial radio back in I'm probably going to get blasted from Kyle for being inaccurate about this because he has a background in that. But think about radio. When it came to getting your music, if you were a new band, played on the radio, you had an extreme uphill battle that you had to face. However, you had other routes you could go through to try to get your music out there. And, going underground, having mixtapes, that kind of stuff, bootlegs, distributing your music however you could to get it out there, handing it on the streets. Ultimately, for music lovers, what mattered is getting your hands on the music you loved. And if enough people liked that music and wanted it and went to those shows and backed it and picked up that music, well, then they might generate enough interest from a record label to sign them. They might get played on the radio. And in the end all goal is that it was going to be good for everybody if that band was successful in those methods. Now, maybe the system should have supported them better. Maybe they should have had a better support mechanism to get into the radio stations and the music stores in general. Comic books are kind of similar. There's a lot of comic book companies that just cannot get their comic books into LCSs easily until they've established the creators involved or the titles involved or the characters. And so Kickstarter is great for that. When you start talking about somebody like a Brian Pulido and Coffin Comics, it's a bit of an outlier. It's something where they have campaigns that raise $500,000 for a single issue with many, many, many different covers for their, and they do a great job of it. I love Coffin Comics. I support several of their Kickstarters. They're great. I support other Kickstarters for smaller comic books as well. And the thing to remember is that most comic book Kickstarters are not Coffin Comics.
Right.
And is Coffin Comics good for the LCSs? Probably not in general, but at the same time, that's not really the intended use case. And like Kyle said, they could probably distribute it different ways, but they've had a lot of success with it. And if it's not broken, why fix it?
Right.
So
if it ain't broke, don't break it.
Exactly.
And that's the thing, that the Kickstarter method for so many of these people, be it Coffin, be it Bad Bug, be it Big Dog Inc., be it Source Point, be it Scout, be it whoever, the idea of having Kickstarter just means you get to test your market, figure out if your book's going to sell. And then if it does well, you don't have to go to comic book shops. So with Bronze's analogy and Preston's reference to Harriet Tubman Demon Slayer here, this is a great example and a great analogous example. So in the music world, in the radio world, I don't care how big an artist you are. Taylor Swift, were she not signed to a major label who has a mechanism to get that music to a radio station, would not play on the radio, even as popular as she is. It's just not how it works.
Yeah.
Same thing with Big Dog Inc. or Coffin Comics or Spike Troutman stuff or so many of these other Kickstarters that are doing millions of dollars. They're never going to get into local comic shops. They're just not. because they don't have the contract with Lunar, the contract with Diamond, the contract with Penguin Random House, the contract with so-and-so. Because retailers don't buy directly from creators or directly from publishers, with a few very specific exceptions. They buy from distributors. So if Taylor Swift, right. By the way, for those of you who don't know, JD and I met when we worked at the same radio station. Millennia ago at this point. But, no, it's this idea of, it doesn't matter how popular you are. Without that secondary middleman existence, you can't reach your end goal.
Yeah.
So what do you do if you don't have that secondary middleman existence? You go around them. So in modern parlance, that's putting your music on Spotify, Apple Music, SoundCloud, selling CDs or selling digital downloads of your music on a pay what you can methodology from like Bandcamp. There are so many other ways to get your music out there. And again, to find your crowd.
Mm-hmm.
You don't need terrestrial radio anymore. If you get it, great. But I listen to just as many artists who are never going to be on the regular radio as I do artists who are on the radio. Preston, you clearly aren't listening to a top 40 station. It's about 60% commercials now.
So less than YouTube. No, okay, that's a bad joke. So the other thing I want to say there, though, to get away from the Kickstarter comparison completely for a second, to go back to that idea of how do you support small publishers. There's somebody in chat right now. I just wanted to call her out because she's awesome. So K-pop Junkie, for example, is no offense to her, she's a really small YouTube channel. She's growing, and that's great. But she does something where every week you could tune into her channel and see 3 or 4 creators, a couple of which I bet you've never heard of, that are talking about new comic books they have coming out. Another way to support small publishers is to support small creators, independent creators. Find them on your preferred social media platforms. Find them through channels like that. Listen to their interviews. Treat it like a sales pitch, or even just show them support and echo their content by liking and sharing. That stuff really does matter. Like if you think there's a really cool panel in a comic book you've been reading, you think there's a really good line that the writer wrote, you think there's an awesome bit of artwork in there, share it, because I bet you other people will agree. Not only will they like what you're sharing and want to see more of your content that you're sharing with people, they might want to go check out that book. That's another way you can help, is that word of mouth. It means a lot more to somebody. I was talking to Jonathan Hedrick a couple weeks ago. Stuff like that means a lot more to him than it does to Brian Polito, who's extremely successful already and has an established audience, right, with thousands of people, right? And there are much smaller creators than even those two guys that if you're out there and you can find a way to support them, it is going to definitely help that small independent comic scene become bigger and better.
Right. So the original question was, how do you support small publishers? And again, it doesn't matter. Like Buddy says, some of the publishers have their own printing presses. They can print as many as they want. Doesn't matter. You can print 1 million of something. That doesn't mean people are going to buy it. You have to buy the books wherever they are.
Yeah.
Right? Wherever you can buy them and support them, do it. But then, it's the other intangible things like hitting like on Facebook posts and retweets and whatever you do on Instagram, sharing their YouTube videos. I saw one today. If you want to support a small business for $0, go to their page, hit invite, and then click all, and invite all your friends to like their page. So it's like doing that intangible stuff, who essentially costs you nothing, really helps with that support, right? It's more than monetary. It's name recognition.
Yeah. Yep. I mean, anything you can do to boost that signal And there's so, I mean, how many comic books, think about yourself as a comic book reader out there in the audience. How many comic books have you started reading, buying, supporting because someone you like and trust told you about it and they were excited about it and that got you excited about it and then you wanted to go read it and support them? That is a huge part of comic books. And, we talk about a little bit about the LCS experience. That's part of what made LCS experiences and still does make LCS experiences so great is people are able to have those conversations and talk about things that are really good that they're reading, be an evangelist for that sort of stuff.
Right. In my store, we had a whole glass case that was nothing but the smallest of small press. Right. And the whole point of that case was, oh, you're reading The Walking Dead? Here, come over here. Let me show you this book from this other person. Or, oh, hey, you're into Deadpool. Let me show you Max the Inebriated Rabbit. Or, you're into, here, you're into The Flash. Here's the this superhero that's similar, that's indie.
Yeah.
Right, that's small press. And giving them that floor space as well. Now, not a lot of shops are going to carry the smallest of small press. I carried a book for a long time called Jujitsu Jesus, which if you can find any Triple J, it's worth reading. It's Jesus comes back at the end of time to do battle against the greatest evils ever and can only defeat them with jujitsu. Right?
Sounds cool.
Yeah, it's a concept that you have not taken enough drugs yet to fully understand. And the thing about the book is that it was really popular once you get it in somebody's hands. But it's made by two guys out of their garage in Iowa. Like, their Kickstarters, if they make $1,000, are hugely successful for them. And so supporting somebody like that, again, the dollars don't matter. I mean, they do, but they don't, because it's so small, right? What matters more to them is likes, shares, retweets, all of that kind of stuff. And then when you see them at a convention going up and saying, hey, I really enjoyed your book.
Yeah.
When you see somebody out and about, you're at a convention, instead of standing in line for 8 hours to meet Chris Evans or going to your local grocery store and standing in line, not even your local grocery store, and standing in line to maybe meet Jason Momoa, go to the local convention and walk up to that guy who's nobody's talking to because they don't know who he is and be like, hey, I'm a big fan of your work. Like, let's talk. And then in 5 years, when that guy is the biggest name you've ever heard of, that guy's still your friend. And so supporting indie is super important. And being on the front lines of supporting indie is super important.
Yeah, absolutely. And for the record, not only does being around Jason Momoa at not your local grocery store give you enough drugs to understand the plot lines of Jujitsu Jesus, because I was close enough in proximity to acquire said drugs. But the other part of it is I went to an LCS and supported an LCS at the same time, because that is the closest LCS to me, which is still terrifyingly far away, unfortunately. That's what it's about. Like, getting out there, checking out stuff that you haven't seen before. So, we talk about it all the time. I love the concept of voting with your dollars. I love the concept of being, kind of that social media evangelist when it comes to comic books or even not just comic books, but whatever you're into that's kind of nerd related, right? But especially with comic books, of course. That's insanely valuable. And supporting people, like I mentioned K-pop earlier, there's a lot of other great people that do it. Supporting people that go out there and talk to those creators, supporting them at conventions, all that stuff helps. Like, it is one of those things where it might feel like you're throwing a pebble into the ocean sometimes, but I've talked to creators at cons, and I know this sounds weird, but I know that they're thinking about that interaction later on, or I've literally had, talk to them again later on. They remember that interaction. it meant something to them. It motivated them to make more work, or it motivated them to keep doing what they're doing in some tiny, small way. Those things all add up. People love hearing that kind of stuff. There's lots of different ways out there you can support those creators, lots of different ways you can support those publishers. Somebody said, unfortunately, I think it was Preston said, unfortunately, you have to know about these small publishers projects. And sometimes it seems like I hear about a handful of what is out there, and that's a problem.
I have a solution.
Perfect. I did too. Good. Go for it.
The one of the easiest solutions, Preston, is to walk up to these small publishers at conventions, or go up to them on Facebook or Twitter or whatever, and ask about a mailing list. Get on their email list. Follow them on the socials. If you hear about one, odds are they're going to talk about another. And then they're going to talk about another. And then follow somebody like K-pop. Follow somebody like Triangle of Truth. Watch Miss Jen's Talking Shop show. Today she had 2 creators who are Kickstarter creators today. And it's watch these shows, and then when you find them, hit the follow button, hit the like button, sign up for their mailing list. Because here's the thing, and it's a little annoying, but it's worth it. I get so many emails from so many creators and small publishers that I follow up on, that I've done that with, telling me when they have a Kickstarter launching, telling me when they're doing a GoFundMe, or when they're doing a con appearance or whatever, so that I know where I can support them with my dollars. Mm-hmm. I say buy the books where the books are. Well, the easiest way for me to find out where the books are is for them to tell me.
Yep. And then what I was going to say specifically to that question about, you don't see a lot of that. Some of it too is, and this happens to just about everybody on social media, you have to kind of get out of your bubble a little bit of where you normally follow and who you normally follow. And that can be really hard to do. But the way that these algorithms work on social media, where we find out about a lot of this content, or we see a lot of this content in our day-to-day lives beyond just being at a convention or even necessarily at an LCS, is through social media. And so, maybe go to some small publishers, look up a list of small publishers, look up a list of publishers available at even comic shops or off comic book shops, or look at those Kickstarters, and then go start following the company, see the artists and creators they tag in their posts. So you're also directly getting involved with them. And then maybe you might find, YouTube creators or Instagram creators or something like that interviews them, that you can go find out more from them, because they'll tag them in their posts and that kind of stuff too. It kind of leads down this rabbit hole, instead of, maybe staying up till 2 a.m. going down some weird YouTube rabbit hole about alternate Earth history or whatever it is you like to do. Maybe do that one night instead, and you might find out some different stuff about different publishers that you can go support.
So let me tell you 2 stories about how this really works in a big way. The first one was, it was 2015, and a comic book creator who has had a level of success in the independent world, who I will say the name of later, we wanted to have him on a podcast I was doing with JD and another friend of ours, where we were talking about pop culture stuff. We want to have him on. So I drove through a blizzard to a signing he was doing at a Books A Million to meet the guy. And I was the only person who showed up. Now, he would have had a more successful signing were it not for the, I found out later, level 3 snow emergency that had the roads literally closed. It was illegal for me to do what I did. Like, he'd have had a better signing if not for that. But I was able to go and spend an hour and a half talking to the guy and invite him on our podcast, and he came on our podcast. And now that guy has had one of the most successful independent Kickstarters, has worked with 2 professional wrestling legends, is about to do a book for I'm going to forget the guy's name now. The Lon Chaney estate, and has been nominated for Ringos and all kinds of stuff. And that person is Dirk Manning, who at the time was self-publishing. He had left Shadowline and was self-publishing. He hadn't yet signed with Devil's Due. So that guy was Dirk Manning. The other guy was a guy I met at Motor City Comic Con who was doing fan art. And I remember going up to him going, you know what would look really cool in your style? Venom. And he drew me a Venom. And then going back the next year and he's still doing fan art. And I go, you know what would be really cool? A Carnage. And he drew me a Carnage. And then a few years later, that guy was Ryan Stegman. And so I still can go up to Steggy and make fun of him. And by the way, I'm still paying the rates I paid way back then when I get a commission. Because I was supporting that guy when he was nobody. And so supporting these companies when they're small gets you in the door. And that's not important necessarily, but it means that you're there on the ground level. And when they get big, they'll support you.
You know, there's kind of, you just reminded me of a point, which, by the way, I mean, there's nothing wrong with that, by the way. It's fine to, it's a nice little perk for having supported somebody for a very long time, right? Like, I mean, and they've probably gotten enough from that support that's why they still do that. But there's this other thing that happens, and I'm just going to caution against this when we're talking about supporting small publishers. That phenomenon that Kyle just talked about, where you support somebody when they're small and you grow with them. And there's some people that chase that feeling of being the supporter of the really, really small guy, the real big underdog. That kind of hipster trope of, I knew them before they were cool.
Right.
Then what happens to some people, this isn't everybody, but it does happen, is they then start to get mad when other people find out about that, and it becomes a bit of a bandwagon. Look, you can always go support a new small creator. I'm not telling you how to live your life, but another thing that helps those companies is when they start to see some success, don't bail on them just because they get popular, unless you have some other, like, you don't like what they're doing now or whatever. Of course, you can do whatever you want. Right. But that's another thing is, see these people through for as long as you feel like you need to help them out, because sometimes when they hit that kind of first launching point, that's when they need the most support from their critical supporters.
I made that mistake when I was young with bands. I'd get into a band when they were nobody. They were playing basements, for 8 people. And then they'd sign a big label, or they'd sign a deal to even a small indie label. And I'd call them a sellout because they weren't playing basements anymore. And I realized probably about the time I was 20 that, oh, wait, those people are your friends, you moron. Like, don't ever begrudge your friends having success.
Yeah, and Sean has a great point too, is that you don't ever, right. Those are nice perks, but don't expect them or ask for them.
And the day Ryan's wife tells him he's not allowed to give me a discount anymore, I will stop taking his discount. Like, that's just kind of the way it works, right? Like, you gotta be willing to pay the piper. You gotta be willing to play the game once these guys, regardless of what level of success these people are having.
Yeah.
So
100%.
One last thing I want to say about supporting small publishers is be willing to ride the wave, right? And I'm having this with a small publisher that I support right now. I was there before anybody. It's true, man. Anyway, I was there before anybody knew who they were. I was with them at their peak, and now they're struggling. And you got to be willing to be there when they're at worse than they were when they started, or when they're making decisions are bad, or when I shouldn't say that, when they're making decisions you don't agree with.
Yeah.
Unless they're doing something that is so violently opposed to your personal beliefs, you have to walk away. Remember that oftentimes bad decisions like canceling books, letting creators go, firing staff that you've come to be close with, all these things are being made because of internal business decisions, not comic book decisions. So while you disagree with it, as long as they're not giving you the middle finger, supporting them that way is important as well.
Yeah, and that actually dovetails perfectly with what Sean just said there is, if they ask for honest feedback, go ahead and give it to them. And that, that's part of that is if they're making those decisions that you don't necessarily agree with, if you're a good, upstanding, vocal member of their fan base and community, you can respectfully voice that. And maybe they'll understand like, oh, you know what? This person's been supporting me from the beginning and maybe they have a point. Maybe I shouldn't be talking about X, Y, and Z, or maybe I shouldn't have done this with that character because it was disrespectful in this way or that way, whatever the issue is. That's a really, really smart point.
So, real quick, because we've been at this an hour and we still have, this is our second week. We still have 2 topics we haven't talked about yet. I'm going to answer one very quickly. And if we want to dive into it later, we can. That's the question of insurance on your collection. The answer is State Farm. They're one of the few large insurers that will insure collections. So State Farm. The other one is live action versus animated. And I don't think we can tackle that in any kind of quick fashion.
No, but I will just to go back to the insurance thing. I wasn't sure if you were still talking about that point or not. Here's the other thing. Do not assume that because you have renter's insurance or something along those lines.
Yep.
Right. Don't assume that covers your comic book collection. Read the fine print. In fact, I'll tell you, there's like a 99% chance that the collectibles and other certain things that you may think are covered on there are not covered on there, or they're not covered against the kind of thing that can happen to comic books, which might be like water damage from a natural disaster, et cetera, et cetera. Right. So you really need to talk to your insurance company to work through what is actually covered in your policy. And you may need to adjust that coverage based on how much your comic book collection is part of that for you.
Right. I mean, like I said, that's a topic we can dig into another time. I mean, because what I go through with my collection every 3 years is not average by any means. And so, I just say State Farm when people ask me, how do you insure your collection? I go, call State Farm. Because the process of working with them, because they do insure collections, and specifically, they have like a methodology, right? They have a mechanism. And other companies that I've had insurance from have not. Jay, they're not always good neighbors. And in fact, oftentimes they are not good neighbors. However, they do have a mechanism for this. And until the same companies that insure these $1 million collector cars want to insure my comic book collection, I'm kind of stuck.
Yeah, but I think I don't even know if we need to touch on that again later, but I would say that the best advice for people that maybe wanted to look into that, talk to your insurance agent, because even regionally, your specific insurance agent's office may have a slightly different version of that policy. I know with, like, for example, Nationwide, I've heard of some variance between regions of what they are supporting and not supporting when it comes to extra coverage. So definitely look into it, talk to your insurance agent, make sure you have everything in writing. Don't just assume that they're telling you the truth, that kind of thing.
Right. No. Yeah, like I said, and that's the other part, right? Like if you buy insurance from a website, talk to an agent when we're talking about your collection. Find a person and talk to them. It's not always super simple, but it can be. Sean, that is not something they should have told you. But always talk to a human.
Yeah. When
it comes to collections, it's just easier. It might not be easy. When I had farmers insurance here at the office on all my stuff, they would cover anything in the boxes, but they wouldn't cover all of this or any of the equipment, right? In my business insurance, I had to buy a separate policy from a separate company to insure the stuff on the walls and the infrastructure. So just talk to a person because it'll help.
I guess there is one other thing we do need to talk about on that topic, and it doesn't need to be a long game. It's more of a tip. The other thing too is when you're talking to that agent, go over the claims process and what they will need when you go to talk to them. There's a lot of great software out there for tracking your books, sometimes photos, sometimes videos, Sometimes receipts are going to be required depending on the amount of the comic book and what it's worth and all that, et cetera, et cetera. So make sure you have that information as well.
Sometimes every 3 years you have to fly in a CGC grader or two to grade and value your collection so that your insurance company knows that when you ask for $4 million worth of coverage, you're not full of crap.
Yeah, sometimes I have that problem. I got to do it like every 2 months. It's just like, it gets old, man.
Well, no, it's we had an insurance company for years and years and years that insured the collection. And that was their requirement, was every X number of years, we had to bring in not us and people we didn't know company. It was usually CGC. We did have Overstreets come a couple times, but to go through the entire collection, grade and value. And we weren't allowed to see him. We weren't allowed to talk to him. Nothing. It was ridiculous. And I'm so glad I don't have to do that anymore.
That's awesome. Yep, it's a whole thing.
I hate insurance so much. You gotta have it, but my God, is it a pain in the ass?
Oh, and pretty much, yeah. Well, in every form it exists, it's a thing. On that note, that's just two of the topics this week. One of the topics last week. These were brought up. Look, if you're watching and you're live in chat, if you're watching on the rewind, these suggestions are fantastic. I've said it many times on this show. We want to talk about the things you guys want to listen to us talk about. We could argue over anything about comic books, and we often do.
We will at some point resort to arguing over pie flavor.
Well, yeah, because strawberry rhubarb is the best, and everybody knows that.
Rhubarb is gross, and you know it.
Oh, it's amazing. See, we can do this all day, but
I will honestly cop to never having eaten rhubarb.
Well, if you do, make sure you cook it, because otherwise it's poisonous. But
that's why I've never done it. I'm scared.
I figure if grandmas everywhere can make it and we're all still alive, it's you're safe once you eat it. It's also delicious if you like a little a la mode on it. Anyways, we can do that. So we want to make sure that you guys are bringing forth those suggestions. These were fantastic topics. There was another one brought up in the chat earlier. I'll copy into our little documents that we have for a future show. All these things really help. Jay has highlighted the form you can go fill out on our website. You can always just mention those things in chat as well. We love hearing about it. Thank you so much, guys. Hey, there we go, round guy. I can mess with some French silk pie. Don't get me wrong.
Chocolate cream pie. We're done. Anyway.
Yep.
All right. So, guys, thank you for coming. This has been Devil's Advocates. We will be back next week, but we are taking the week of the 13th off. So be here the next 2 weeks. We're taking the week of the 13th off, and we will be missing that week, and then we will be back the week after. So just be prepared for that.
But yeah, we will see you next week on All Hallows Eve.
Wait, no, I thought next Monday was the 30th. It's the night before.
Yeah, isn't that All Hallows Eve, the day before Halloween? Or is that, well, here's one thing I know is it's Devil's Night. Yeah.
It is Devil's Night. That's what we've been calling it. So Devil's Night.
That works.
So maybe we should do a supersize episode that night because it's Devil's Night.
Maybe, and we should come up with some spooky topics or something.
Yeah. All right, we'll see you guys next week.
Join the party. Head over to our link tree to find all the links for everywhere the experience is all the time.